Hi everyone, this is Jason Elias and welcome to our latest vlog regarding alternate legal careers. Today, it's my great privilege to introduce Stuart Clout from Ansarada. Stuart's got up bright and early. He's in from London and giving us his time. Stuart, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Jason. Good to see you again.
So just to put some context around this, Stuart, do you want to explain how you and I first met?
So I was a very junior lawyer working for a little boutique corporate firm in Clarence Street in Sydney. Jason, you had recently, I think, left Baker and McKenzie.
That's right.
And had established your Elias recruitment firm, which I think was 100% of the staff was you.
Yeah,
And
it was in those days.
that was very, very early. And I was a junior lawyer, and I was still a lawyer in my nappies at those days, just learning the craft, and that's how we met, because there was a common floor that we all worked from.
Stuart, you grew up in Newcastle, I believe, and what was it that attracted you to law in the first place?
The main reason I studied law was because I got a stonking mark in my HSC. I think they called it a TER back then. I don't know what they call it these days, UAI or something. But I would faint if I got a needle. So medicine was out of the equation. And I guess anyone that's taken interest in Newcastle University knows that its medical faculty is world renowned. So it's very leading, but it wasn't for me. And so I think the classic next step down in career choices, if you can't handle a needle, then go be a lawyer. So I didn't actually ever have some sort of childhood dream of being a lawyer or watching LA Law and thinking I'm going to be a trial lawyer. I was always intrigued by it. Funnily enough, I did my you remember we used to do work experience in year 10.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I went and did a work experience as a civil engineer because I thought I was going to be a bridge builder. Yep. But I ended up a lawyer, and I never regret that decision. And I guess we'll probably unveil the part of the story of where that went over the course of the sort of next 12 or 13 years as a lawyer.
Yeah. So how did you end up down in Sydney?
So I graduated law, and I got work as a paralegal in a little small firm up in Newcastle. But I sort of had bigger dreams for if I'm going to be a lawyer, I want to go to the big city with big buildings and, people in suits. So it was always a natural step to obviously go a couple of hours down the coast to Sydney, and that's where you and I met. But then, I sort of still had bigger dreams of even bigger cities. And after a couple of years practicing as a junior lawyer in Sydney, I got a one-way ticket to London and came over here. And I actually practiced most of my legal career in the London market, actually.
And I heard you worked at Tesco for quite a while doing, were you a checkout person for most of that time, was it?
I was a checkout operator at Woolworths in Mayfield.
Oh, there you go.
When I was at university. And
Tell us about your role as in-house counsel with Tesco.
So I worked in the corporate and commercial legal function at Tesco, and it was a hybrid role because I also spent time at Bowen Leighton Paisner as well. Which is now Bowen Leighton Paisner Bryan Cave, I think is what they're called. They merged with the big US firm. So BLP is, I guess, one of the Silver Circle firms over here that sits under the Magic Circle. Through the combination of that and working at Tesco as well, I got exposure to deals of a size and a level of complexity which were far beyond anything I'd experienced in the Australian market, and also particularly at my level of PQE I was pretty lucky. And we worked on major acquisitions, major IT outsourcing, and big commercial transactional work. And in fact, actually at one point, I was working on this super top secret project. And the project was for Tesco to acquire the Coles supermarkets business in Australia. So as a young Aussie lawyer, right? It never happened. We were part of the process, which obviously ended up in Wesfarmers acquiring the Coles.
Right,
but we were actually in and amongst it. Not obviously no one knew that we were at the time. But as a young Australian lawyer, in London working on the acquisition of Coles, it was a bit of a random thing, and it was really exciting.
Forget LA law, you could focus on Coles law.
Coles law.
Sorry,
actually very good. That's very good.
Tip your waitress.
And so I had 5 or 6 years there working with all of the big firms in London because we worked really closely with, the likes of Freshfields, Clifford Chance, Linklaters, BLP, etc. So I got an amazing level of experience. I always said that 5 or 6 years was almost like 10 or 12 years in terms of experience. I was working with some of the greatest lawyers in the London market. My colleagues at Tesco were absolutely fantastic. And so I got the benefit of really getting, pulled up by the sort of.
Is it still a cultural fringe? Is it a lot more sophisticated in that market than what we get down here, or it's pretty much even?
No, I don't think. I think it's much of a muchness. I think maybe there's a few more zeros on the deals over here, but broadly speaking, in terms of issues, sophistication, and quality of both from the investment banking professionals through to the legal services professionals, it's much of a muchness. And I think it's been many decades of Aussies coming this way, and also Brits coming the other way. Obviously, also plenty doing their time in Singapore and Hong Kong, and so the sort of amortization of that experience across the professionals through, and I think the financial services, investment banking through to legal, they work so intertwined. It is relevant to mention them, even though we're talking law here. It's I think what we see over here is just the depth of capital and the weight of capital, which drives transactions, is phenomenal. And even now, I'm back in London after I've spent more than 10 years living here, on and off, backwards and forwards from Sydney, and it still takes me by surprise even now when I come back and I go, wow, this economy. And you obviously got Europe next door. I mean, absolutely. I went to Brussels last week. On the train for 2 hours, you're in Brussels. The European economy is as big as the US economy in terms of GDP and also population. So it's, that's the thing, is just that it's bigger. There's more happening.
A lot happening. Back to the chronology. From Tesco's, you came back to Sydney, and I think you're at Colin Biggers as a partner for a while.
That's right. So I took some time out. Lived in South America for a year, doing some travel. Landed back in Australia. I started as a senior associate at Colin Biggers and Paisley. It's a really good firm, really good, solid Sydney firm. When I joined, so since then they've grown. They acquired a couple of other firms. They've got Melbourne, they've got Brisbane, etc. And then joined the partnership of Colin Biggers and Paisley after being there for a few years in the corporate team, mainly focusing on sort of mid-market M&A and sort of still the odd little bit of commercial transactional. And then, funnily enough, through my experiences of doing mid-market M&A and trying to optimize, I guess, my profitability on each of those transactions, I had a bit of an idea around where technology can play a role in optimizing transactions. And that then, I guess, in terms of the chronology, is how I ended up leaving the law and quitting partnership of a big law firm and starting a startup in the tech space, which was.
So tell us about the Dockyard.
So the Dockyard then was a product or a solution that was focused around workflow and project management for a transaction. It was about all of I call it, smart people doing dumb stuff is a key problem in legal services and financial services as well. And I thought, well, smart people shouldn't do dumb stuff because the smart people are expensive, and probably clients want smart people doing smart stuff only. And when I'm talking about dumb stuff, I'm talking about the labor around project management, workflow, tracking tasks, tracking issues. Has Bob done that thing? Yeah, but it's important stuff because you've got to keep the transaction in this use case that I use a transaction. You've got to keep it going. You can't miss things because even the smallest thing. I remember once forgetting to file a ASIC 484 form within the 28 days it was meant to be filed, and having a heart attack, right? Yeah. Thinking, my God. Or, I remember once, almost forgetting to make sure that the stamp duty was paid within the 14 days or 7 days of completion or whatever it is. There's all these. They're all just little admin tasks, but big problems if you don't get them right. And I always thought, okay, I had whiteboards and I had notepads, and I thought there's got to be a better way to do this. And I looked into other industries, which are far more advanced in terms of use of technology for project management, task tracking, calendar management, and workflow. Because workflow is, so I describe it like this: project management is, Jason needs to do A, B, and C tasks. Workflow is Jason knows he needs to do A, B, and C tasks because I've allocated those tasks to you. And then you get a notification going, oh, Stuart has allocated task A, B, C to me. And then they're either done or not done or half done, or they're due by this date. That's the workflow component.
So walk me through this. You've had this idea. How did you test if it worked? Did you pull aside a couple of buddies and say, hey, what if we had something that did this? Would this make your life easier? How did you do your due diligence on whether you actually had something?
A lot of that, but by far the most compelling due diligence was I actually had a client who was making 30, 40 acquisitions per annum, buying lots of, in the industry he was in, buying lots of small mum and pop businesses, aggregating them together for a classic roll up to IPO it or some other exit for him. And I was on a fixed fee for each one of those small transactions.
Every second counts.
Well, it was difficult to make money, and I was thinking, how am I going to be more efficient? But also, I was working in a big law firm, but on the mum and pop side of the transactions, I might be on a call trying to negotiate some indemnifications around warranties in a share purchase agreement or a business acquisition agreement, and the lawyer's going to pop off and do a DUI down at the local court. So the sophistication of the advisor on the other side wasn't necessarily always that balanced. So it actually made the process much more difficult and laborious than if you had, a Baker and McKenzie lawyer on the other side who does this stuff every day and knows the issues.
Knows the process,
So I established over the course of a weekend, I basically whipped up a little no-code website. I used Zapier, and I hooked a Google form that the guys at my client side could just fill in a couple of answers to some questions. That linked into an MS Word document, which was my template for the sale agreement, which auto-populated it. And now that linked to my Gmail, which auto-emailed the email off to the lawyer on the other side. And all of a sudden, I just stopped one day, and it was actually my client. He went, "Did you build that?" And I went, "Yeah, I built it on a Sunday afternoon." He goes, there might be something in that,
Yeah.
And the dockyard was really born out of that, because I was like, wow, this really works. And it was actually brilliant. Like I was my own first test customer.
So do you have to be a techie to get into legal tech?
No, not at all. I'm not techie at all. The stuff I just described is not techie. It was all just stuff, cloud-based services. It might sound to someone listening to this, oh, that sounds really complicated. It's not complicated. It's super easy. I was curious and I was motivated, sure, but not techie at all. I don't code. I have zero technical capabilities. But we stood the business up, and we built a really great solution that we started selling originally mainly to lawyers, but that's because it's what I knew. But then what happened is I realized, hang on, it's not just lawyers that have this problem on transactions. And we started selling more into financial services, so the M&A advisors, investment banking space, and corporates directly as well.
Stu, I imagine that conversation would have been an interesting one, walking into the partnership room of Colin Biggers and saying, oh, thanks very much, I've enjoyed the ride, but I'm going to start up a .com.
Yes. So, I hadn't been a partner for very long either. And, I think a credit to my superiors at CBP at the time, who I guess sort of thought, well, if he wants to go off and do it, then go and do it. They were very gracious, and they've always been supportive ever since then. And I still count some of those partners as some of my friends, which is good. I think the more interesting conversation, Jason, was with my wife, who had just given birth to our brand new first child, and
another startup.
Another startup, and she had just taken some leave of absence, obviously from work, to have our baby and have some time off after that. So that was the more interesting conversation, that I was stepping away from the certainty of partnership. And in many ways, I think what's confused a lot of people about me, and maybe if it still confuses me, is why. Like, you'd reached partnership, you're finally whilst I was a junior partner, I was at the bottom of a different ladder, but that was you're starting to get well established, you're actually starting to get paid well for probably one of the first times in your legal career. It's not like today when you see, here in London, newly qualified salaries of £140,000 per annum, and you're just like, it's the crazy stuff. It wasn't like that when you and I met, mate.
I think I started at Baker's on 42,000 Aussie.
Did you? Yeah. I think when I was, the firm I worked at when I met you, I was on 50 or 52 or something, and I was 3 years qualified.
Yeah.
So I was showing our age. But I was obviously at a great firm who's very well established. Actually, partnership was probably going to be going through a very natural refreshing process with people retiring and stuff like that. So I was actually pretty well set and could have just kept my head down and I would have been off and running. But no, I chose to go and start a startup when I had no idea what I was doing. And probably have just a vaguely slightly more idea what I'm doing now. Sort of, was it 7 years later since I originally moved away from the partnership.
So you're being very modest. You've been very successful by rolling Dockyard into the Ansarada group and now heading back into the big world in the UK. Tell us a little bit about that, the success of the business and how you got to where you are now. And please don't be modest. We know you've done a fantastic job and should be proud of your achievement.
Thanks, Jace. No, I really appreciate that, mate. It's when we first launched the Dockyard, we never had a virtual data room component. And so for those listening, that don't maybe know the deals with virtual data room is a very secure space in which you control the disclosure of documents during diligence. And it's a very well-established technical space. You've got some very big players globally, Intralinks, Merrill Data Site, and Australia's own Ansarada, which is one of the big players globally and has been for 15 years. And we at the Dockyard were never interested in competing in that space because we thought there was no way we can compete. That space is very, very well served. We were focused on the previous issues of workflow and project management. But what did happen was that as I was speaking to the advisors, they were like, "Oh, do you have a virtual data room feature as well to go alongside the cool stuff you've already built?" And as that question got asked more and more, I realized, actually, hang on a second, we need one of those. And we originally produced our own version of, it was fine. But the key thing was that Sam Riley, who's one of the 4 original founders of the Ansarada business, has always been quite open and vocal about his view of taking Ansarada onto a much broader platform around governance, risk, and compliance, helping companies achieve their potential and grow confidently through making good decisions. And often good decisions is having access to the right information at the right moment. And he always saw the virtual data room as a pathway to a broader, deeper relationship with the hundreds of thousands of companies that we at Ansarada meet every day through our virtual data room business. And so I also at the Dockyard realized there was a much bigger play than just helping a deal get done a little bit smarter. So we acquired, before I did the transaction with the Ansarada team, I acquired a business called Athena Board, which is a board portal. So those out there that maybe know Diligent, it's in the very, very similar space. It's optimizes the process around information and security with board papers and workflow around that. It was a natural adjacency for us. And so I'd already started on that, expanding the stable of solutions journey. Then when Sam and I got together, we were very aligned on our sort of individual visions of where this could go. So we thought, let's bring these companies together because, it's that classic 1 + 1 equals sort of 3 or 4. And there's also much more. You can achieve much more together because we're bulkier. We have more, more funding, more size, more customers collectively, etc. So we finished that transaction almost to a day, almost a year ago. Looking at the date there on the top of my computer, we re-quoted on the 9th of December, but I think we actually officially closed around about this day. And so that's been a year in. It's been really successful. The market's responded really well to what we've been doing. And in many ways, the market hasn't seen half of the good stuff yet. We've got a really great strategy. It's enabled me to come back to the UK to really drive the business in this giant market. So we're established over here, Jason. We've got offices in London, Amsterdam. We've also got offices in Chicago and Johannesburg. So I sort of, run that sort of aspect of the business, whilst Sam and the rest of the leadership team are based down in Sydney, and they're the engine room of Ansarada. It's where our DevOps are, our developers, finance functions, people and culture, etc. So it's it's been a very interesting ride. I certainly would not have predicted any of that stuff I just told you when I first stepped away from partnership at CBP.
So you mentioned meeting up with Sam. There seems to be some sort of a collegiality between those working in the law tech space. I think it's seen as a brave new frontier, and a lot of people collaborate and work together. I know you were involved with the ALTA group, the Australian Legal Technology Association. Would it be fair to say there is that camaraderie and collegiality?
Oh, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. And, there's a lot of people, not me, but there's a lot of people that have done a lot of work around Alta. I certainly have been involved where I can be. I was certainly there on the first day when there was a few beers being had in a pub down in Sydney. And there's a few of us who were at that sort of frontier piece going, geez, this is hard. We're sort of sole founders in law tech. What it really is law tech. Do lawyers even know what law tech is? And the outer group was kind of formed around that. There's some people, particularly no less than Jodie Baker, who's really driven that organization and made it what it is today. Like, there was a ragtag bunch of us in the first sort of AGM, and now look at Alta. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but certainly there's hundreds of startups and there's thousands of members. And they're spread all over the world now, but with that fundamental core of Aussie founders in law tech, it is a family, actually. Steve was there in the early, and I know that, you've got Julian from Neota, and you've got Jim from Pursuit, and, the fact that I speak of these people with their first name and their business, it feels like a family to me, and I know that it's really. Then there's been a sort of a second generation and a third generation of founders who have come through in quick succession year after year, and the cohort has swollen significantly, and that's fantastic. And you've now got I guess a group of businesses which range from publicly listed multi-hundred million market cap, which are part of that family, through to someone who started this morning.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone who just quit being a lawyer and, bless your cotton socks, go hard, and, solving a problem that they've perceived.
So just on that, looking back, any regrets? Are you happy you made that decision? And what advice would you give to an early career lawyer who was thinking, maybe I should go out into this brave new frontier, or maybe I should take the security of working my way up to partnership?
So no regrets, absolutely. So I can answer that one very easily. Definitely no regrets, because I haven't felt more alive for the last few years than I had beforehand, because just the sheer level of learning and just new stuff I've been learning and doing stuff I had no idea how I'm doing. Things are starting to go pretty well for us at Ansarada these days, but I certainly wasn't that many years ago, I made the comment, I've never worked harder and got paid less in my life. And that's the reality often. And so you need to be pretty passionate. And if you're not really genuinely passionate about what you're doing, and that comment could be applied broadly, then perhaps maybe stick at the law firm until you can think of something better. But I don't regret staying in law for a fair while and actually progressing through to, I guess, what those classic career milestones of partnership.
Because you couldn't do what you're doing now if you didn't have that knowledge.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Like, what I learned being a lawyer has fundamentally set me up for what I've been doing now. And also still, even today, even though I haven't been a lawyer for ages, so I've definitely, I've forgotten more than I ever knew. And, I can leave it to my colleagues to comment on how much I ever knew. But I still can sit down in a boardroom at a big law firm with other partners, and you know what you're talking about, right? You've got sector credibility. Now, I'm not saying you have to have also been a partner, right, to be able to do that. But certainly, if there's an observation made by Silicon Valley startups many years ago, particularly in enterprise software as a service, that vertical credibility or sector credibility is super important. You need to be able to empathize with your customer, and I can empathize with my customer because I've sat on the boardroom floor at 2 a.m. at Colin Biggers and Paisley putting post-it notes on 400 completion documents for a 9 a.m. Conditions precedent completion, and thinking, and I'm sitting there in my suit, but I got my shoes off because it's 2 a.m. and there's some Chinese takeaway somewhere in the corner that's been eaten. Sitting there going, there's got to be a better way to do this, right? But I've done it. And again, that's not and I'm not an advocate for the whole, I had it hard, so you have to do it the hard way as well. Obviously, sure. I'm not, because I wouldn't go and try to create some technology to optimize that process so that someone doesn't have to do that. But Certainly that not a single regret at all. I don't see myself going back into law now, but I feel like I owe that profession and that career choice quite a lot.
And just a side one, not to do with technology, but you mentioned before that as a fairly junior lawyer, you moved over to the UK. Would you recommend that as a good rite of passage for lawyers thinking of expanding their career?
So certainly for me, it was absolutely, groundbreaking in terms of it took me to a whole different new level. And there's
George. Doing
George.
star jams.
Yeah. And it for me, it really opened my eyes, but in more than just professional terms. I was, as you mentioned, I originally came from Newcastle, studied up there. Newcastle's a decent sized town, came to Sydney. Sydney's an even bigger town. So it's not like Sydney's a tiny little outcrop. But then I and then I came to London, and just getting out of Australia and really experiencing the cultural depth and the diversity of the UK in particular, London in particular, and then Europe, and the opportunities that gave me to travel I think that I would say that I grew personally even more so than I grew professionally, and I grew professionally massively, as I described.
And you met your wife.
I did, and you know what? Just the other day, Jason, because we live in Shoreditch, which is, for those who don't know, London is right in the middle of the city and is known for its nightlife. And we walked past the nightclub that we originally met at literally just the other day. We're walking down the street and we're like, hang on a second. And our son didn't quite grasp the man down in the background, the significance of it. But it was, so yes, and yes, but is it necessary? No, I mean, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, have very sophisticated capital markets, very sophisticated legal services providers, and often have, people that have worked in big markets that you can learn from. It's difficult to say yes today because, COVID is restricting people's options, but that'll pass. And right. But Hong Kong is probably not as open as it used to be in terms of an option as well, because obviously the Asian markets are different again. Certainly Singapore.
Singapore has picked up a lot of the slack from Hong Kong.
Yeah. And, and then there's obviously the US itself. There's the big bright lights of New York and Chicago and, LA, San Francisco, but certainly London is classic for us Aussies, right? And Kiwis and the South Africans, because it's such an easy transition. We've got a great reputation still these days over here. I mean, you can tell the Aussies and the Kiwis in the London law firms because they're the ones that the lights are turning on for in the morning. Yeah. When they turn up, right? Because they're getting in, they're working hard because they're sort of over there to sort of make it.
Yeah.
And there's an extraordinarily good and strong and deep network of Australian lawyers over here, Australian investment bankers that you can tap into. Look, it did me well. Everyone goes on their own journey, but yeah, I would reiterate that point. I grew professionally enormously because of the opportunities I got over here, but I think I grew even more personally, and that combination is pretty difficult to beat.
And very interesting whenever it's Ashes season like we're about to have now.
Yes, well, and what's going on with the captaincy? We rolled another one.
We'll switch to that one. Mate, it's been wonderful catching up with you. Thank you so much for your insights. I'm sure the audience will really get a good understanding of what the careers are available for someone who wants to move into legal technology, and what some of the good lessons to learn from your experience. And thank you for being so insightful and candid with your experiences, Stuart.
Yeah, well, thank you for your time and for asking me some nice questions. If nothing else, people will get a laugh from George in the background. But I will say it's even easier now than it ever has been. Law tech is real. It's continuing to grow. There is not a single law firm or in-house legal team that is not looking at or already actively adopting technology. And there's a lot more problems to solve. So it's even easier now. So if you're thinking about it, go nuts.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, it's probably a good idea to look up places like the Institute of Legal Technology, which is run by by Terry Mottershead up at the College of Law in Brisbane, and lots of good organisations, and particularly ALTA. You should look that one up as well.
Yeah.
Stuart, thanks so much for your time again.
Have a great evening, guys. See ya.